Hello, friends, and welcome back to another Business for Unicorns podcast with our newest format, the Grab Bag Rapid Fire Q&A with me and Pete. Pete, shall we dive right on in here? Shall we begin giving value?
Let's do it. I'm ready. I'll start us off with a question that I think is best geared toward me. It is how to get parents out of their own way when dealing with kids. I don't believe I've ever seen a youth client or athlete in MFF when I've walked through either of your spaces. Correct. So we'll just say this is a Cressy Sports performance problem or specifically maybe a performance training problem. I have found that my business partner, Eric, takes an especially effective approach to this, where it comes down to, as we discussed on the last conversation, expectation setting. And he does a really nice job of sitting down with parent and athlete during the initial screening process behind closed doors and looking at the athlete while he presents questions. And so if he has to, he'll say, "Hey, Mark, your dad." He'd say, Mark, got a question for your son here. Hey, son, I have a question for you. Tell me about your injury history. If Mark chimes in and says, well, he did this, and he says, no. I want to hear his words. I need to understand how he thinks about this stuff. And it basically is, it's never disrespectful in nature the way he does it. But what we are doing, there was a quote, I think I heard it on the Entree Leadership podcast a while ago, and I'm going to butcher it right now. But basically, he said, we at Chick-fil-A, the guy who was being interviewed, said, we are running a leadership academy thinly veiled as a fast food service operation. And I just thought that was awesome because when you really look at what we're doing, we're running a leadership and personal development operation for impressionable young athletes that is thinly veiled as a get strong and run faster, hit harder, yada, yada, yada. So that starts with conversation number one. Eric makes it very clear, if you're going to train in our space, this is an adult service offering. So you got to act like an adult. You got to look me in the eye. You got to answer these questions. You've got to take ownership of your process. And the parents see that we're doing that. The athlete is forced to embrace it. Mm-hmm. It's important. If you're going to be in our weight room, moving heavy weight around, you need to be able to answer questions, look us in the eye, talk about what we're working through. And so our approach is just to be very clear about our approach right from the start. And I don't believe I've ever heard of a parent saying, I'd rather my son not answer that question. It might be a little bit of a culture shock for them when they're like, well, I'm used to being helicopter dad. What do you mean you're not going to let me talk? But they also have just enough self-awareness to be like, well, maybe this is a good thing that my son or daughter is going to step up to the plate and, act on their own behalf here. So somewhat long answer to a short question.
I have no further comment.
Got it. Great. Scheduling strategies in a semi-private model. What you got there? We're both running that model to a degree.
Yeah. It's interesting because I'm not sure exactly what the question is here because, of course, semi-private can mean a lot of different things. We've recently essentially rebranded away from calling it semi-private to small group personal training, in part because in our market, that's a lot more Googleable because if people are Googling for, and it's just going to improve our Google My Business rankings when people are looking for personal trainers in Hell's Kitchen. So I guess the thing I will share, that I don't know if this is precisely the question that is being asked. I think this might be a little bit more towards your situation, Pete, where I know that you have a lot more people coming in and out. And I know that historically the scheduling, my understanding at CSP was not super, super regimented and then has gotten more regimented. But at MFF, we run 6 people at a time and it's all appointment based. So you come in, it's a 60-minute session-ish. The session itself runs about 55 minutes because we need some time to get people in and out. And one coach at a time is working with 6 people. It's interesting because for that Gen Pop small group personal training model, it seems once again, independently, much of the industry has moved towards that particular ratio. I think that's probably a sweet spot where you're still able to use all of the toys because you can still handle technically demanding things. And frankly, just from a business perspective, you're able to really give a pretty individualized experience to as many people as possible that one coach can oversee. It seems that around 7, 8, that starts to become more of a class, which isn't wrong necessarily, but becomes a little bit of the no man's land. And when you're at 6, you can still command something of a premium, still give individualized programming. So that is just a recent change we made in MFF that I offer to you, dear listener.
Yeah, we run a 5-to-1 model. Yeah, we're 5-to-1. We have been since the start, but our sweet spot's really right in the 3-to-1 range. I'd say that's kind of where we live. And the 5-to-1 we treat as more or less the top of our threshold for when sessions can overlap. And so we are not particularly militant about saying, hey, session time is up, get out the door. It takes as long as it takes to do your program in our model. But we also know that there's a certain, it might be a 75-minute training session, it might be a 90-minute training session. So we typically try and budget new groups to start roughly every 75 minutes and have no problem with there being an overlap between groups so long as it stays within the 5-to-1 client to coach ratio, because that's what the terms of our insurance coverage dictate. This has become extraordinarily easier to handle since COVID forced a more diligent scheduling methodology upon us from an online scheduling standpoint. And that was really just because we needed to be able to be effective in contact tracing and understand exactly who was coming through the space. That is one of the post-COVID changes that will not leave us. It has made us better at what we do. We are better at managing client foot traffic. We're better at managing duration of training sessions. We're putting out a better product. And to an extent, we needed a massive disruption like a pandemic to get our clients to fully embrace such a significant change in relation to what used to be like this linger and loiter model. And they were absolutely willing to fall in line because of how much they had to compromise on up to that point, that they were like, hey, I'm just happy to be back here. Rules are rules, let's do it. Whereas had this not happened, I would have had a lot of cranky, impatient people with bad habits to break. So it was one of those silver linings, those pandemic silver linings.
Hurrah. Hurrah.
Next one, Coach Casey Lee, good guy, says, best practices to announce price increases and how not to back down from pushback. You want to hit it?
Sure. So this is something we coach. I feel like literally every month I do at least one call with a member of the Unicorn Society about how to do this. And one of my jokes, which is true, is that the only thing business coaches tell you to do is raise your prices. That's the main thing they do. And then you make all your money back because your coach makes you raise your prices because nobody's charging enough and nobody has the courage to raise their prices. So raise your prices. And here's how to do it. If you're going to raise your prices, I think crude high level best practice is, on the one hand, don't piss on their face, tell them it's raining. Acknowledge that the price is going up, which they might not love. But on the other hand, realize it's not a completely unreasonable thing. It's not the end of the world. And most of you in most markets, if you're talking about a relatively modest percentage or dollar increase, it's not going to be that big of a deal. This gets a little tougher if you're massively underpriced. If you're offering, let's say, large group training for $89 per month, there's virtually no market in the country where that's actually a viable model. So admittedly, if you need to over time, say, double your prices, first of all, you're not going to do that all at once, and it might mean you have to do a rip off the Band-Aid move. So let's talk first about if you're doing a modest percentage or dollar increase, which is the yearly thing. I don't think that needs to be a big deal. That's just an email. I think as part of that email, I would encourage you to make sure you communicate to your members all the things you're doing to invest in their experience, invest in space, invest in continuing education, invest in equipment, because it's not always going to be obvious to them how much money you're spending to improve their experience. And I think it's reasonable to offer one perfunctory line that acknowledges, due to cost of living increases, due to the fact that expenses go up every year, like most businesses, we have to unfortunately raise the rates just a little bit. Thank you for supporting us. And frankly, in that situation, if it's not a big increase, I don't think it needs to be a whole lot more than that. Now, and the second one, if you're doing a course correction and you are discovering, unfortunately, let's say you've hired Pete and I, we're looking at your P&Ls, we're looking at your margins, we're like, oh, this isn't going to work. And you have to do a massive increase on your prices. I think then you might need a slightly more robust mea culpa. I think it's important to mostly do the same playbook. I think the only difference is if it really is a massive percentage increase, I think it's important to acknowledge that essentially you have made a mistake and you've come to understand and provide the level of service that you want to provide. This is going to be a necessary change. In that situation, you have a few things you could do to dull the pain. You first of all could push it out a little bit. You could say these changes are coming in 3 months. You could choose to keep some of your clients in their current rate for some period of time as a way of dulling the pain. That's not my most favorite thing because that gets complex. And ultimately, usually when you're making this change, it's because you need to, because your business is not really profitable in the way that it should be. But I think it is a thing that you could do. And those are probably the two main ways I think you could, quote unquote, delay the pain and make this not such a Band-Aid to pull off. But the challenge is, like I said, part of what I don't love about that other model, and MFF did this when we had our own moment, is it just becomes difficult to track. It's not my favorite move, but if you have a simple pricing structure, you can get away with it. And then the final question is how to deal with pushback. I think the best move I've heard here, which I think is great, is essentially just put a PS in the email, do a video sales letter too. And this is a playbook from Alex Hormozy, who the mostly controversial, but very smart guy, offers a lot of great things. What you want to do is you want to just get them in an individual conversation. You want to acknowledge if the price increase is massive. It's not my intention to have any of you lose your home or not be able to afford the service that really matters to you. If this is a major issue to you, let's set up a time to talk, right? In that situation, you could potentially choose to be generous with a small sliver of individuals that are going to care about this. But in my experience, having coached so many people through this, having done this myself a lot, at the end of the day, it's 36 hours of pain. It's always way less people care than you think are going to care, and a way less number of people terminate your agreement than you think you're going to terminate. So I think my main takeaway is have courage, use those strategies, and just rip off the Band-Aid. It's never going to be as bad as you think it is. People get it. And if they don't, that's weird, and that's not your problem. It costs money to run a business.
Completely agree. In my experience, if you're not doing it too often, it's nice to just say, it's been X number of years, or it's been 18 months since we increased prices. As you know, the cost of doing business goes up over time. We are excited to reinvest in the business. And I like to get so transparent as this is what I'm going to buy with this new revenue. It might be, I would like to, it could even go so far as to say, your favorite coach, I want to retain him. And in order to do so, I would like to pay him a better wage. And in order to do so, I need to slightly increase prices. I've seen that work with consulting clients over the years where you play that kind of emotional piece where it's like, hey, I want to keep your favorite person around. And he's too good as based on his current wage. I have identified an opportunity to take better care of him, and it is a modest price increase. Nobody is like, F that guy, he doesn't deserve more money. They're all like, you're totally right. I will happily spend more money with you for that. So it comes down to just transparency about where you're going to spend. Because if it is, I just want to make some more money, so pay me more next month without any context, I think that really sucks. So people are forgiving if they know, or just bordering on happy if you say, hey, we're going to buy new turf. We're going to buy, we just put a bunch of new dumbbells in the gym. Hope you like them. All right. Advancing a coach to a higher role like head coach. This is one that we kind of struggle with here at CSP. I don't want to say struggle. It's just that there's only so many head coach roles available. And it's easy if you pay well, someone could squat on one, but you also want to retain rock stars. So we are investigating introducing essentially like an assistant director role, which falls from a comp and responsibility standpoint at the halfway point between the director and the entry level role. Expectations just become clear that we are grooming you for the next role. So your job description changes a little because I expect you to be a sponge with the leader who likely will not be here forever, but still has some time with us. That's how we're attacking it. Otherwise, don't lie to people and get them just to stick around. If you don't have an opportunity for them to pursue, I think you need to be honest with yourself and them and just say, hey, I think you've outgrown the role. I mean, you're really good at what you do. And there are director roles out there. I talk to gym owners every single day who basically say, I need a right-hand man. I need a number 2 in command. And that person might be on your staff and you might not have the payroll dollars to properly compensate them. You might not have the responsibilities to properly intellectually stimulate them. And the worst thing you can do is lie to them and let them stay around begrudgingly and expect to extract a great product from them. So the minute someone's outgrown your role and you don't have opportunity, I think you should be looking for the next opportunity for them just as hard as they are looking. And that way it doesn't become a toxic dynamic in your space.
Yeah, I think the one thing I will add to that briefly, which is challenging, is sometimes you have an amazing trainer who's an amazing human and wants more growth and compensation, and they're not good at this other role. Because oftentimes a lot of the things that somebody needs to do as a head coach, depending on your model, can sometimes be very different, not the least of which managing other people. It is the cliche that the best salespeople are often horrible sales managers, and many businesses are destroyed because you promote somebody to something that they're incompetent at because they want the next thing. So you give them this thing to do worse than they were doing.
Do you know what that's called, Mark?
The Peters principle?
The Peter principle.
Peter principle?
I hate
That's
that.
Right. Yeah, it's annoying, but the Peter principle, for those not familiar with it, is essentially organizations promote people to their level of incompetence. Because what happens is, and it's nefarious because this is a thing that's very hard to avoid unless you're really willing to fire people up or out. Because what happens is if you keep giving people that next opportunity, at a certain point, you will promote them to something that they can't handle and they're not good at. And then you can't usually demote them, so you need to fire them. That is rough. So what tends to happen is most organizations are filled with people that are promoted to the job that they're not good at. So everybody's not good at their job, which is not a great thing. Not a great thing.
And they came up with a really shitty title for that principle. Thank you very much.
All right. Yeah. Why is it called the Peter Principle? Do we know?
I honestly don't know. It's just stuck with me ever since I've seen it in, who knows, the Harvard Business Review or something like that.
Sorry, buddy.
You want to hit the next one?
Let's do it. This next question is navigating your first full-time hire. Navigating your first full-time hire. I think this is a great question and a great topic. I think, to your point, Pete, we are seeing, I know we mentioned this in our last podcast, there are lots of questions around onboarding. So I think for the most part, I think can hold off for a lot of this for how you properly onboard and train people, because that's really what this question is. The one thing I will offer is navigating your first full-time hire is, when you're thinking about this, as far as how you decide what you're going to outsource, I think one must be judicious about getting things off your plate as a training gym owner, operator, or any business of any size, where you're finding there's more things to get done than you're able to do. So you want to give some of the revenue of the business to have somebody else help you out. And you just want to be very intentional about getting things off your plate that have a lower hourly dollar value than you can otherwise create through your activities. So the classic example here is if you are unable to focus on activities that generate business through marketing and sales, if you are unable to improve retention and customer service by engaging with your clients because you're too busy doing things like sorting receipts and back of house bookkeeping, that makes sense for something you want to outsource, because at the end of the day, it likely will cost you less on an hourly basis than you can create for the business at large if you were able to direct your activities, your energies to higher value activities. So that's the most useful way to think about that. If I were to give you like a very specific tactic, is do a time audit and make a list of all the things you're doing in a given day. And then if you were to get so nerdy, you could even go so far as to ascribe an hourly dollar value to each of those tasks. And then you're looking to outsource the things that take away your energy, that take up your time, that you don't like to do, but importantly are relatively easy to have someone else to do. I think rather than making a full-time hire, and certainly I don't know the context of this question, so you might absolutely be in a place where you're ready to make a full-time hire. I think more and more as the world of VA agencies improve, I think you're going to see more and more people leveraging that as a very affordable and great first step towards outsourcing things and getting things off of your own plate.
The only thing I'll add to this is you mentioned your first full-time hire, and I want to emphasize the importance of full-time. It seems logically that gym owners typically will say, I want to make a hire part-time to start. And that's perfectly fine. I understand the budget is the budget, but you need to be accepting of the fact that part-time roles don't attract full-time talent. And so it's hard to get great coaches in your immediate market sometimes, which means somebody is going to pick up shop and they're going to move somewhere. And they're dramatically less likely to do that for a guarantee of 15 to 20 hours a week with a kind of a mandate that you just got to figure it out otherwise. So we all want to have our cake and eat it too. AKA, I want an exceptional coach who's going to be tolerant of $15 an hour and no health insurance. come on, move on into town. But the reality is you're not going to pull the best candidates. Every time I put a job opportunity on the CSP intern alumni page and it's part-time to start, it's crickets. But if I put one on and I say, this is a full-time role with benefits, there's engagement. I get DMs. People want intros. So it's just something to think about as you consider how you're going to scale your team. It's probably better to be super stretched thin up into a point in time where you've created the resources to make a full-time hire than it is to add that kind of convenience hire of a part-time person and then expect them to be a rock star.
Yeah, I'll give a quick micro pro tip that I heard once from Mike McAllowitz, who runs Profit First, which is a great accounting system that a lot of people can use to manage their cash. And one thing he suggested doing is if you're considering making a hire, you essentially create a separate bank account. And then for a period of several months, you just debit from the business the money you would pay to that employee. And if you can do that for several months, great, then you're ready to hire the person. If you can't, then you don't have enough money to hire the individual just yet. And I realize that can be your chicken or the egg, because sometimes not having the individual means you're not able to spend time on marketing and sales activities. But that's just a fun pro tip if you're considering making a hire and you're not sure if you can afford it yet.
So Mark, we're sitting on several more questions, and I think we've got time for one or two more today. Of the remaining pool, are there any in particular that you think are particularly important that we accelerate to the front of the list?
Yes, I will. There were a couple questions that came in through my Instagram that I wanted to touch on very quickly. And then the rest of these we don't get to today, we can do another one. We can do another one of these. So one question came in I thought was interesting. One individual asked, are people reaching out for different mental health resources than 2 years ago? And because of the context of this question, my assumption is this individual is asking, are potential clients, our prospects, our current clients reaching out to your gym for more mental health resources than 2 years ago? The short answer is sort of. I don't know they're necessarily reaching out for mental health resources necessarily. I don't know they're coming to Mark Fisher Fitness and expecting that we can help them specifically with mental health, which definitionally is a clinical thing that is best handled via a therapist. However, I think mental health in general in our society is something people are talking about broadly. I think that trend was massively accelerated through COVID because virtually nobody got out with no bumps or bruises mentally. And I think overall, that's an awesome thing. It's awesome as a society and a world we're talking about this and kind of normalizing the fact that, a lot of people have some bumps and bruises from childhood. None of us got out of there without some suffering. Thanks a lot, moms and dads. You meant well, but you did some bruising. And kind of one of my MOs is much like not everyone from a training perspective, not everybody needs a physical therapist, but everybody benefits probably from a physical therapist going in, because you can have a great trainer and you can move pretty well, but maybe your serratus anterior is gunked up. Maybe there's some things there a PT can see and help you out. I think similarly, therapy is not dissimilar to like general coaching, personal development, reading personal development books. I don't know that everybody necessarily needs it, but virtually everybody probably would suffer less because they just have a different, similar to a clinician, a physical therapist, they just have a different set of tools that I think can reduce your own suffering and then can then allow you to be more, just a better version of who you want to be in the world. So this is obviously a big topic, and I think that answered the question. I would also say briefly in the Mark Fisher Fitness community, which is certainly something of a secular church, I think is fair to say, that is a topic that comes up a lot in the Facebook groups, and in really beautiful, candid ways. People just kind of share what they're going through, and they will trade resources. So I would say, interestingly enough, the Mark Fisher Fitness community is probably looked to as a resource for mental health resources. And I think so far, in a way that's probably beneficial, I think people do understand that MFF is great for personal development, we're great for life coaching, but ultimately we're not clinicians. So if we're dealing with actual mental health stuff, we are sensitive to that, we're supportive of that, we want people to get health. We can help direct people to that as a reference in our network. And of course, we're not actually therapists. So at a certain point, our scope ends and it's better to find a mental health professional that can jump in.
Yeah, this is a conversation that isn't presented to us often here in the performance gym space. I think probably because there's a problem that people in the performance community, although we are recording this less than 48 hours after Simone Biles withdrew from competition for, to a degree, this exact reason. But it's somewhat taboo, it seems, in the professional athlete setting to admit any degree of weakness. Therefore, it does not become a commonplace question or issue we come across here. And also because we cater to a youth population. I have 13, 14-year-olds, and I don't know that they have the emotional maturity to identify that type of need just yet, or to voice these type of things. So it's just less prevalent in my space. Not less important, just less acknowledged is probably the best way of putting it.
Totally. Awesome. And the final thing I'll say, the final one that came in, I just want to give a quick resource to you, and we'll do this one very fast. I had a couple topics. One was on personal finance, which I know we've covered, I believe, in our last podcast, where I gave some recommendations. As a reminder there, resource, read the book, The Simple Path to Wealth, if you want truly the simplest path to wealth. I'll be writing a blog post soon where I'll make another couple of recs for personal finance books, among them Automatic Millionaire, and Ramit Sethi's unfortunately titled, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. If you just read those 3 books, you're basically good. Read those 3 books, read them twice, and then never think about it ever again. You'll know all you need to know. The finance world is made for complications because a lot of people can profit off of that, but ultimately for most human beings, until you're dealing with a complicated amount of assets and wealth, it's not that complicated. So that I recommend read that one. And then as far as accounting for gyms, in the same email, I will make a few recommendations. I think Mike Michalowicz's Profit First, which I think I've already mentioned here today, is a great book to understand cash management. I think that Profit First for micro gyms is a great read to get some benchmarks for training gyms. I'll be making another few recommendations in this email, but I want to say the big takeaway here for accounting for gyms is finding a great accountant. This is maybe the one thing that it's unforgivable to attempt to do on your own. You will never not make the money back you give on a qualified accountant by hiring them to do it. Not to mention outsourcing a gnarly thing that you probably hate and you're likely horrible at. So finding a great accountant is a big piece of financial success in life in general, particularly for business owners.
I echo that times 1 million.
Hurrah!
And we also have accountant recommendations. Should you find yourself flying blind there, please do send us a DM. There is no single referral I enjoy giving more than Tom's email address. I love giving people the sanity that comes with a good accountant. So it's a wonderful gift to give.
Yeah, feel free to email. Either of us. My accountant Roman also does work in other states, and I've referred to many of my friends, and I've received many kind thanks. So with that said, we're going to bring a pull up here for this one. As always, we'd love your feedback. We'd love to hear if you're liking our new format. We're having a great time with it, but we want to continue to make sure that this podcast is valuable for you as possible. If you have more questions or things you'd like us to cover, you can feel free to DM either of us or email us at our respective email addresses, mark@businessforunicorns.com and pete@businessforunicorns.com. And anything else you'd like to say, Pete, to our listeners?
I'd say, fear not, Michael will be back if you do not enjoy
and if you're in hell and you're miserable, like, where's Michael? He'll return soon. All right, friends, have a great day. Thanks for listening.
Hey friends, before you go, just one more thing. If you enjoy this podcast, you get value out of it, you enjoy listening, please share this podcast, comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe. Please share it with friends and family. We don't spend any money on marketing or advertising. And so the only way people find out about this podcast is from you. So please do everything you can to share it with friends and fellow colleagues in the fitness industry. We love making it and we want to keep doing it for a long, long time. So I appreciate your support. Go have a kick-ass day. Bye.